With Trump's comeback in full swing, a highly respected forecaster currently gives him a 62% chance at winning a second term. Today, we'll be taking a look at Nate Silver's 2024 electoral map based on his updated forecast. Nate Silver was the head of 538 for over a decade and is one of the most well-known election forecasters out there. Looking at how the odds have changed for both of the major party candidates, Trump was behind Harris throughout nearly the entirety of the month of August, but he has now taken a significant lead and is the clear favorite to win the Electoral College. So we're going to start off on our map by filling in the safe states. These are states that Nate Silver gives Kamala Harris or Donald Trump a 99% chance or more of winning. Starting off with the safe blue states on the West Coast, we have California, we also have Illinois, and then in the Northeast, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. That will be it. This gives Kamala Harris just 128 electoral votes. For Donald Trump, however, we have a significantly longer list of solid states. Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, all of Nebraska except the 2nd District, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Indiana. These total 103 electoral votes. We'll now be moving on to filling in the likely states. These are states where either candidate has between an 80 to 99% chance at winning. These states will still clearly favor one candidate or the other, but they are going to be slightly more competitive than the states we've already filled in. Starting off for Kamala Harris, we have Washington and Oregon. Yes, she is going to win these states, but the margin is not going to be nearly as large as what we're going to see in California. California is going to go to Kamala Harris by somewhere around 20 to 25 points, while Washington and Oregon will definitely be in the 10 to 20 point range. We also have Colorado and New Mexico, two states that generally have been shifting to the left over the last 2 decades. Just look at the election of 2004. They both went to George W. Bush, but in 2020, Joe Biden won both Colorado and New Mexico by double-digit margins. Now, Kamala Harris is probably going to do considerably worse. She's probably going to win these states by single-digit margins, but she is nonetheless the favorite. While up in Minnesota, this is Governor Tim Walz's home state. Walz has given Kamala Harris a considerable boost here. If Tim Walz were not the Democratic vice presidential nominee, Minnesota would be significantly more competitive. But as of right now, Kamala Harris has an 84% chance of winning this state, a state that no Republican has been able to carry in a presidential election since 1972. Minnesota has the longest voting streak of voting for Democrats in presidential elections, longer than any other state on this map because it's the only state that Ronald Reagan did not win in his 1984 landslide victory over Walter Mondale. As we continue moving east, we also have Connecticut and Rhode Island. These two states simply aren't as liberal as neighboring Massachusetts. We also have New Jersey and Delaware. Just fundamentally, they are not as left-leaning as some of their neighbors. Down in Virginia, we have a state that Kamala Harris is still slightly favored in. No Republican has won the state since George W. Bush in 2004. Joe Biden carried Virginia by a double-digit margin in 2020, but just 1 year later, a Republican, Glenn Youngkin, won the state's governorship. Today, Kamala Harris barely has an 80% chance at winning, with her odds sitting at 82%. On the map, she is the slight favorite, but this is definitely going to be a key state to watch, as Joe Biden lost the lead in the polling in Virginia before he dropped out. This is a state that can definitely get more competitive in the next 2 months. We also have Hawaii, where the Biden administration's handling of the Maui fires has been very unpopular. Hawaii generally is a state that is shifting to the right. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won it by 32 points, but 4 years later, in 2020, when Joe Biden shifted the entire rest of the country in favor of the Democrats, Hawaii actually voted more in favor of Trump than it did in 2016. So Hawaii will also likely be blue. Up in Maine, we have the state as a whole, where Kamala Harris has an 85% chance at winning, while in the 1st District, her odds are just under 99%. The 3 electoral votes, 2 from the at-large vote and 1 from the 1st District, will all go to the sitting vice president. Right now, it might seem like Harris is doing really well, but honestly, if you look at this map, barely any remaining states are going to go in her favor. So, we're now going to fill in the likely Trump states, where he has an 80% to 99% chance of winning. We'll start by getting the most obvious ones out of the way: Montana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Alaska. There's no doubt these states are going to go to the former president for the 3rd time in a row, and he's probably going to win them all by 15 points or more. But on a fundamental level, They are slightly less conservative than states like Missouri, Wyoming, Indiana, or West Virginia. Quite a few more likely states for Trump, beginning in the Midwest with Iowa and Ohio, two states that Trump first flipped in favor of the GOP 8 years ago. He won Iowa by 9 points and Ohio by 8. But in 2012, Barack Obama won these states by a considerable margin. So they really took a huge leap towards the right in 2016, when Donald Trump made a huge impact on the Midwest. In 2012, every single Midwestern state was blue, except for Indiana. Go back to 2008, and every single Midwestern state voted for the Democratic nominee. That was a very good election year for Barack Obama and the Democrats. But in 2016, the election was pretty close, and Trump managed to win every single Midwestern state except for Illinois and Minnesota. He even came very close to flipping Minnesota. So, Iowa and Ohio are now very Republican. In 2020, Trump won them by nearly the same margin when everybody expected these two states to be significantly more competitive. The Republican governors were re-elected in 2022 by solid 20-point margins. According to Nate Silver's forecast, Trump has a 95% chance of winning Iowa and a 97% chance of winning Ohio. So, they are also going to be placed into the likely red category. We also have Texas and Florida, a combined 70 electoral votes, two big prizes for Republicans. In the past, Texas was still a red state. Just go back 4 decades. It hasn't voted for a Democrat since 1976. Texas was actually solid red in 2012 in favor of Mitt Romney, but in 2016, Trump did a little worse, winning it by just under 10 points. Then, in 2020, when a lot of people said Biden could win Texas, Trump still won the state by 6 points, which was a lot better than what many people expected. In 2024, there's no doubt Trump is going to win Texas by at least a double-digit margin. He is doing very well in the state. Nate Silver gives him a 91% chance of winning. Yes, Texas is generally shifting more to the left, but that is going to take a very long time to come to fruition. Democrats are not going to win major statewide elections in the Lone Star State for a very long time, and by the time they do, the entire Midwest will likely have gone in favor of the GOP. States like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are all shifting more in favor of the Republicans, so Texas will remain likely red on our map. The final likely state to fill in is Florida. This used to be a key battleground, a state that both parties went after. But in 2024, probably the biggest change from 2020 is the fact that Florida is no longer considered competitive. This makes things a lot more difficult for Democrats because there are no big states that are more liberal than they were 4 years ago. Florida, however, is a lot more conservative now than it was when Biden was elected president. Joe Biden lost Florida by 3.4%, performing worse than Hillary Clinton, even though most people thought Biden was going to flip the state entirely. He lost it, and in 2022, Governor Ron DeSantis won re-election by just over 19 points. Florida is a red state, and that's why Donald Trump has an 88% chance of winning it for a third time in a row. The Sunshine State will be the final likely state. Now, we're left with just a handful of states worth a total of 99 electoral votes. We are now going to fill in the lean states, where Harris and Trump have between a 60% to 80% chance of winning. These are the states that really could go either way, but one candidate still maintains a slight advantage. We'll begin by getting the 2 remaining congressional districts out of the way. Trump is the favorite in the 2nd District of Maine, while Harris has a slight lead in the 2nd District of Nebraska. For Vice President Kamala Harris, she only has one remaining lean state on this map, and that is New Hampshire, with 4 electoral votes. These are the same 4 votes that Hillary Clinton almost lost 8 years ago in 2016, when New Hampshire was the second closest state in the entire country, behind only Michigan. The Granite State today does favor Democrats slightly more. Looking at the odds, Harris has a 70% chance of winning New Hampshire. That's good, but honestly not too great, considering Trump has a 1 in 3 chance of winning a state he has never won before. We are now left with just the Big 7. These 7 states will decide the outcome of this election. Some lean a little more towards the right, and some a little more towards the left, but there's no doubt that these states could go either way. They are true toss-ups. We're going to start off with North Carolina, which has 16 electoral votes. Donald Trump is the solid favorite here, with a 75% chance of winning, or 3 in 4. That is definitely very good, but it is not impossible for Harris to win. However, I would definitely argue that it's very unlikely she'll flip the Tar Heel state. Democrats have only won North Carolina once since 1976, and that was Barack Obama in 2008, a very good year for the Democratic Party. In 2020, Everybody thought Joe Biden was going to win North Carolina, but nobody thought he would do better in Georgia, which was seen as the more conservative state. Trump's margin in North Carolina was 1.3%. It was surprisingly good considering the polling average throughout the entirety of the 2020 election cycle showed that he was going to lose. So, on our map, North Carolina is going to be the first lean red state. We also have neighboring Georgia, where Kamala Harris has just a 33% chance of winning. Trump's odds sit at 2 and 3. He is definitely the favorite to win back the Peach State, which Joe Biden won by a very narrow margin in 2020, 0.24%. This was the closest state in the entire country. The margin is just so small that Trump doesn't need to do much to win back a small portion of the electorate. Harris is doing significantly worse right now in polling, and in terms of general enthusiasm compared to Biden 4 years ago. Joe Biden was destroying Trump in the polls. People thought he was going to win 350 to 370 electoral votes. In the end, he only won 306, but nobody is saying that about Harris. The few people who think Kamala Harris is going to win are saying that she might win maybe 280 or 290 electoral votes. It's very different from what we saw 4 years ago, and that's why Trump is in a much better position. He is always the underdog, always underestimated. In Georgia, Trump has a 67% chance of winning, so it's also going to be leaning Republican. We also have Arizona, which, very similarly to Georgia, voted blue for the first time in 2 decades in 2020 in favor of Joe Biden, but the margin was just so narrow. According to Nate Silver's forecast, Trump has a 3 and 4 chance of flipping this state back, a state he won by nearly 4 points just 8 years ago. So, Arizona will also lean Republican. Before we fill in the Midwest, I'm going to start with Nevada. It has 6 electoral votes and is going to be a tilt state, which means that either Harris or Trump have between a 50 to a 60% chance of winning. These are really the closest states. According to Nate Silver's forecast, Donald Trump has a 59% chance of winning Nevada, so it's almost a lean state in favor of the former president. As of right now, it will still fall into the tilt column. Harris can definitely still win Nevada, although she is the slight underdog there, as of right now. But it's a state that no Democrat has lost since 2004. Looking at Trump's history here, he lost it in both 2016 and 2020 by over 2%, so it'll be difficult for him to win it, but he can definitely do it. Although in the end, it's not going to be the state that gets him over 270. Honestly, whoever wins Nevada is not going to make that much of a difference. It is going to come down to the Midwest and the 3 states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I'm going to begin in Pennsylvania, as this is generally seen to be the most important one. Its 19 electoral votes probably could have gone to Joe Biden if he had stayed in. Joe Biden was born in Pennsylvania. He has that connection. Democrats don't have that anymore. So, Pennsylvania, if it goes in favor of Trump, even if Harris wins Nevada and Arizona, Pennsylvania will be enough to get Trump to the White House for a second time. As of right now, the good news for the Trump camp, though, is that he is the favorite. He has a 61.7% chance of flipping the Keystone State, a state that he did win in 2016, along with both Michigan and Wisconsin. So it's not even near impossible for him to flip all 3 of these states back. Pennsylvania will also be lean red. We're left with just Wisconsin and Michigan. Right now, these 2 states are both going to be very, very close. Harris choosing Tim Walz to be a running mate will give her a slight boost in Wisconsin, which generally is the most conservative out of the 3 states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But with this boost that Walz gives Harris, Wisconsin is going to be slightly more competitive. In fact, Pennsylvania is probably going to be the most conservative out of the 3 this time around. Now, to fill in Wisconsin and Michigan to complete this map. For a while, Nate Silver's forecast had Harris in the lead, but today, Donald Trump has taken back both of these states. Trump leads with a 52% chance of winning Wisconsin, and in Michigan, his odds are just over that. Looking at the betting markets in Michigan, basically we've seen a collapse for the vice president. She had a 2 and 3 chance of winning just half a month ago. Now her odds are barely over 50%. So both of these states, according to Nate Silver, now slightly skew in favor of the former president. So, based on his 2024 election forecast, Donald Trump is on track to win every single battleground state and get 312 electoral votes, while Harris is at 226. This would be the worst Democratic performance since Michael Dukakis in 1988.